Good morning. It's Wednesday, the 5th of February. You're tuned in to our 10 a.m. newscast coming to you from ARIRANG's news centre in Seoul. Let's take a look at what's making the headlines. The two Koreas are meeting to discuss the dates and location for reunions of families separated since the Korean War. Amid its peace offensive, Pyongyang criticizes Seoul and Washington's upcoming annual military drills. The United States has once again called on North Korea to show it is serious about denuclearization if it wants the long-stalled six-party talks on the North's nuclear program to resume. Plus, in a drive to boost Korea's employment rate to 70%, the government unveils a package aimed at keeping women in the workforce after they start a family. Officials from the two Koreas are sitting down as we speak to begin discussions on the details for resuming reunions for families separated since the Korean War. The reunions, if held, would be the first in more than 3 years. For more, we're going to connect to our correspondent Hwang Sung-hee at the Unification Ministry. So, Sung-hee, a huge day ahead. What details do we have right now?
Good morning, Mark. Today's working level talks were scheduled to begin at around 10 a.m. Korea time, so officials from both sides will be engaged in discussions about now. Departing for the truce village of Panmunjom earlier this morning, the head of the South Korean delegation told reporters that he would try to bring home some good news for the divided family members by reaching a positive agreement today. The two sides may have a long day ahead of them, though, as they will be sorting out the details, such as the date and the location of the reunion. While South Korea had earlier proposed holding the event from February 17th to the 22nd at North Korea's Mount Kumgang Resort, this may not be a viable option anymore, as officials in Seoul say they need at least 2 weeks to prepare. Now, another issue is that North Korea will most likely want to push back the date to sometime after joint military drills between South Korea and the United States, which is scheduled to begin late this month. Experts say the North could make a counter-proposal to hold the reunion after the key resolve and full legal exercises, which end in April. Mark?
Yes, well, it seems to be the way, unfortunately, but we've seen North Korea back out of agreements many times in the past. Is there a vibe that Pyongyang might once again have a sudden change of heart and scrap plans for the reunions?
Mark, that's a very difficult question to answer because, of course, North Korea is one of the most unpredictable regimes in the world. But yes, we have seen North Korea break its promises many times before. And in fact, we just saw last year North Korea walk out of its agreement to hold family reunions at the very last minute, which was a disappointment to many divided family members. Experts that I've spoke with say such a scenario is very likely this time around as well. That is, if South Korea and the United States push ahead with their joint military drills. They say the North may call off the reunions and blame it on the South for sticking to its aggressive nature despite North Korea's willingness to improve relations. Seoul maintains that humanitarian issues like the family reunions should be dealt with separately from military drills. So there is still a tug-of-war going on between the two Koreas, and we are still uncertain about North Korea's motives. But one thing to keep in mind is that hundreds of thousands of divided families are waiting to reunite for the first time in more than 6 decades, and time is running out for these very elderly divided family members to see their loved ones again one last time. Mark?
Yes, it really would be terribly sad if for the families if the reunions got called off again. We'll keep our fingers crossed that the two sides can reach some kind of solid agreement to hold the reunions. Well, thank you very much for your report, Sung-hee. That was our Hwang Sung-hee reporting on the working level talks between the Koreas on resuming the long-suspended family reunions. And we'll be checking back in with her again during our next newscast at noon Korea time. In other news, the United States has laid out the steps North Korea must take before the US will consider reopening the six-party talks aimed at denuclearizing the North. A top US official says Pyongyang must start abiding by a deal reached almost 10 years ago. Connie Kim reports.
The United States has once again firmly laid out its demand that North Korea take the initial steps towards denuclearization in order to resume the six-party talks. At a press briefing in Washington Tuesday, Daniel Russell, U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia, said talks with North Korea should focus on denuclearizing the Korean peninsula and should not be talks for talk's sake. He also said Washington stands ready to negotiate with Pyongyang, but only on the basis of a statement signed in 2005. Under the landmark deal, Pyongyang agreed to scrap its nuclear program in return for security, economic, and energy benefits. However, the North failed to abide by the agreement, carrying out 3 nuclear bomb tests between 2006 and 2013. Russell's comments echo those made by Glenn Davies, the U.S. envoy on North Korea, who said last week that the 6-party denuclearization talks will not resume unless Pyongyang changes its policy direction. The U.S. and North Korea remain at odds as Pyongyang has not shown any change in its position in recent years. Speaking in Moscow on Tuesday, the North Korean ambassador to Russia said the chance of resuming the talks was fading away because of Washington's hostile policy towards the North. The 6-party talks involving the 2 Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan, and Russia have not been held since late 2008. Connie Kim, ARIRANG News.
A new report from a state-run Chinese think tank says Beijing should consider giving up its policy of unconditional support for North Korea if the regime launches further provocations in the future. Paulie has the details.
The Chinese Academy of Social Sciences released last month their Blue Book report on the development of Asia-Pacific affairs for 2014. The Beijing-based institute is the highest state-run research organization in the country and is considered one of the top think tanks in Asia. The new report mapped out 3 scenarios for the Korean peninsula over the next 5 to 10 years. It said either the 2 Koreas would unite, maintain the status quo, or that escalating tensions would result in military conflict in the region. The Academy said that in order to stabilize the peninsula, and in light of greater national interests, China might have to consider dropping its support for Pyongyang. The report stated that in the event North Korea continues to stage provocative acts, Beijing should not adhere to its stance of never abandoning North Korea. According to Chinese experts, Beijing shifted its foreign policy direction on the North after the regime unilaterally went ahead with long-range rocket launches and nuclear arms tests. They say North Korea has become more of a liability than a strategic asset and partner. It's an issue that the Chinese government has been reluctant to discuss publicly in the past, and therefore the release of such analysis was surprising.
This new report from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences deals with how China should respond to the developing changes in Asia-Pacific affairs.
The report also said that there was almost zero possibility of an all-out war erupting between the 2 Koreas in the near future. The release of this latest national report may suggest that China has a growing interest in unification, while letting its closest ally know that all options are on the table. Paul Yi, ARIRANG News.
Japan is about to stir even more controversy about its militaristic past, this time by submitting an application to register suicide notes and letters written by its wartime suicide bombers on the UNESCO Memory of the World Register. Local reports say officials in the city of Minami-Kyushu are pushing to enlist more than 330 messages written by the kamikaze pilots on the UNESCO list in 2015. The region was a base for kamikaze pilots who carried out suicide attacks against US vessels during World War II. Japan had previously tried to enlist Kyushu and Yamaguchi, where Koreans were forced to work in labor camps during Japan's colonial rule of Korea as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se on Tuesday said enlisting the industrial sites would go against the basic ethics of UNESCO World Heritage. Now, balancing full-time work as a mother is a tough juggling act, yet too often working mothers here in Korea have lacked the support they need until now. Much needed help is now on the way thanks to a series of government measures. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
31-year-old Han Ji-hee quit her job as a video editor 7 months ago when she gave birth to her son Taemin. Han says it was impossible to raise her newborn and hold a full-time job.
I didn't want to quit my job, but I had no choice. There was no one to help me raise the baby, and I felt uneasy about putting him in a daycare center.
Han is not alone. Working moms in Korea face numerous obstacles at work that force many to quit. They include a lack of childcare services amid a male-dominated business culture, and to tackle them, the government unveiled a comprehensive plan on Tuesday aimed at making the nation's female workforce a new growth engine.
The best policy alternative when birth rates are low and the population is aging is higher female participation in the labor force. An OECD report also shows that Korea would add 1 percentage point to growth annually if it had equal gender employment.
Programs to support female workers were drawn up in line with women's life cycles. They include increasing subsidies for parents on childcare leave, encouraging flexible working hours, expanding the number of public nurseries, and improving vocational training to make it easier for women to return to their careers. The government also plans to operate and support a pool of substitute workers that can fill in gaps at companies created by workers going on parental leave. However, further support for small and medium-sized businesses is needed.
Large companies will be able to follow the government plans, but SMEs with small workforces will face difficulties in finding substitute workers.
Korea's female employment rate sits at just 54%, much lower than the OECD average of 65%. The government believes that boosting the female employment rate is a crucial factor in achieving its ambitious goal of raising the overall employment rate to 70%. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
And in related news, President Park Geunhye has offered a helping hand to women trying to juggle a career and motherhood. Speaking at a meeting with female leaders on Tuesday, President Park pledged to create an environment that enables women to better balance the two. To get there, the government proposed a set of policies including subsidies for parents on childcare leave, encouraging flexible working hours and improving vocational training to make it easier for women to return to their careers. And shortly after preliminary registration began on Tuesday for local elections in June, President Park ordered officials to keep a close eye on them. Speaking at a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, President Park said as the June local elections are the first elections to be held during her administration, they must be fair and clean. The president ordered government ministries to make sure the political neutrality of the elections is maintained, and added she will penalise anyone involved in acts of corruption. Now, Korean stocks have opened higher on this Wednesday, taking a cue from overnight gains on Wall Street, but the country's main bourse took a battering Tuesday, tumbling 1.7% to close below the 1900 mark, its lowest point in more than 5 months. Analysts say US stocks plunging on Monday, coupled with continuing emerging market jitters, led foreign investors on Tuesday to sell a net 660 billion won, that's roughly $610 million worth of shares listed on the Kospi. Japan's Nikkei also closed at its lowest level in 3 months, falling over 4%. By close of trading Tuesday, the Dow Jones had rebounded, closing up 0.5%, and the S&P 500 also closed 0.8% higher. The Korea's benchmark Kospi is currently trading at 1900. That's up 13 points or 0.7% from Tuesday's close. It looks like Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics will be drawing back the curtain on its latest Galaxy smartphone later this month. The world's top smartphone maker said in an invitation to the press on Tuesday that it would like to introduce a new device on the first day of the World Mobile Congress in Barcelona on February 24th. The invitation did not include details about what the device might be, but it had the number 5 in the upper right-hand corner, suggesting it could be the highly anticipated Galaxy S5. The new Galaxy model is expected to have a 13.2 centimeter HD screen with the latest identification features such as fingerprint and eye screening. Sales of hybrid cars in Korea shot up last month as consumers had more options to choose from. The nation's two largest automakers, Hyundai Motor and Kia Motors, say they sold a combined 2,300 units of their hybrid models in January, which marks a more than 34% increase on year and a near 160% jump from the previous month. It cited the upward trend to the release of their hybrid Grandeur and K7 models late last year. Hyundai and Kia currently offer a total of 7 hybrid models. Now, moving on to the recent oil spill in the southern port city of Yeosu. It's been 5 days now since more than 160,000 litres of oil gushed out into the ocean after a tanker collided with pipelines. Clean-up operations are well underway, as are the questions about who was culpable in the accident. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
Cleaning up the Yeosu oil spill will be harder than initially expected. While volunteers and authorities are doing all they can to reduce damage from the Lunar New Year's Day accident, tidal currents and winds are making things worse. In addition to waters off the southern port city of Yeosu in Jeollanam-do province, the oil has spread north, south, and east from the original spill site to Namhae-gun County in Gyeongsang-namdo province, where an oil slick measuring roughly 30 kilometers in diameter has formed. Aside from the cleanup efforts, questions are being raised about the accident itself. The head of the Yeosu Maritime Police Department said Monday that 164,000 liters were spilled, which is 200 times greater than the first estimates by the company said to be responsible for the accident, GS Caltex. The spill happened after a Singapore-registered oil tanker hit a landing bridge, causing 3 underwater pipelines operated by GS Caltex to rupture. The Yeosu Coast Guard blames the tanker's pilots for exceeding the recommended speed on approach and GS Caltex for not reporting the spill until 30 minutes after it occurred. Residents affected by the spill say they're worried the pollution could lead to health problems and impact fishing, a primary source of income for many in the area.
When I first saw the news, they said it wasn't a big amount of oil that spilled. That's why I didn't think it would spread this far to where I work.
While officials say it is not difficult to get rid of the oil spilled in the water, the bigger problem lies on the seashore, where the cleanup process could take weeks. In the meantime, the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries said Tuesday that GS Caltex should compensate those affected. The ministry, company, and related authorities are scheduled to hold a meeting on the issues surrounding the spill on Thursday. Hwang Sung-hee, ARIRANG News.
In international news, Libya says all of its chemical weapons, including bombs and artillery shells filled with mustard gas, have been completely destroyed. A foreign ministry official told Libyan state media Tuesday that Libya is totally empty of any presence of chemical weapons, which could pose a threat to the safety of people, the environment, or neighbouring regions. The elimination of the weapons, which date from the era of former dictator Muammar Gaddafi, is being hailed as a great success for Libya. The director of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, which helps countries destroy their arsenals, said the eradication of the weapons had been a major undertaking in very challenging circumstances. Russia has offered assurances that representatives of the Syrian government will attend a new round of peace talks next week in Geneva. The statements came before Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's first ever meeting with the opposition Syrian National Coalition chief Ahmed Jabar in Moscow on Tuesday. The previous round of negotiations in Geneva ended last Friday with little progress made. Lavrov said Russia wants to keep regular contacts with the Syrian opposition and is working with all sides to find a political solution to the crisis that began around 3 years ago, in fact. Syria also plans to send a large shipment of chemical weapons out of the country this month and aims to have the removal process complete by March 1st. 2 days after protesters in Thailand disrupted voting in general elections, the opposition Democratic Party says it would challenge the basic premise of the elections in court. 2 complaints were filed with the Constitutional Court on claims that the election violated the Thai constitution as it came during a government-imposed state of emergency. The nation's election commission is set to meet on Wednesday to investigate possible irregularities in the voting process. Meanwhile, on the streets of Bangkok, anti-government protesters vow to organise even larger demonstrations against Prime Minister Yingluck Shinawatra and her government. The protesters are seeking an unelected People's Council to oversee political reforms and want Prime Minister Yingluck out of office. Now, following months of uncertainty, Microsoft has named its top cloud computing executive, Satya Nadella, as its new CEO. The tech firm also says Bill Gates will step aside as chairman of the board, but will stay on as a technology advisor to the company. John Thompson, who has been the lead independent director, takes up Gates's old role. Nadella's appointment ends a long search for a new leader after Steve Ballmer announced his intention to retire in August last year. Nadella becomes only the 3rd CEO in Microsoft's 39-year history, following Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer.
And a good Wednesday morning to you all as we kick things off with the latest in Sochi Winter Olympics. Now, with the Winter Games just days away now, looks like Sochi isn't ready yet. With $51 billion being spent on the Olympics, turns out many of the housing facilities and hotels aren't complete, even with the Winter Games, like I said, just days away. Now, according to several sources, many of the hotels that need to accommodate the visitors from around the world are still under construction, and housing facilities for the media are unfinished as well. And shifting over to golf, where Golf Digest named the top 100 greatest modern-day golfers. With all the top golfers since 1980 being named in the list, Tiger Woods topped the list as the greatest modern-day golfer, followed by the shark Greg Norman being listed number 2 on the list. Meanwhile, for South Korea's very own KJ Choi or Chaekyung-ju, he was listed at number 70, becoming the highest-ranked Asian golfer on the list. Moving over to college basketball, where Syracuse University became the first school since 2011 to become the unanimous #1 team in the nation. After beating Duke over the weekend, followed by an Arizona loss, Syracuse received all 65 votes in this week's poll. And with that, over to domestic football, where the 2014 K-League Classic schedule was released on Tuesday. Now, the league will kick off on March 8th with the defending champions Pohang Steelers facing off against Ulsan Hyundai Tigers, as 12 teams will play 38 matches each for a total of 228 matches. And now over to some Tuesday night's KBL action as the Seoul Samsung Thunders took on the Incheon Itilan Elephants. Now, the first half of the game, Incheon jumps all over Samsung with Cha Ba-wi and Chung Jae-hong, each putting up 10 points in the first half as Incheon takes a huge 45-26 lead going into halftime. And even with Samsung's Lee Dong-jun putting up a game-high 15 points in the game, Incheon never looks back in this game as they absolutely crushed the Thunders 91-58. And finishing things off in V-League, where Hyundai Hillstate dominated Daejeon KGC in straight sets 3-0. Meanwhile, with the Samsung Hwanja Blue Fangs taking on the KEPCO Vic Storms, let's take a look at the highlights. Now, KEPCO playing a very scrappy game from the start as they take the first set 31-29. And with Leo Martinez stepping up for the Blue Fangs with 44 points on the night, the defending champions sweep the next 3 sets as they cruise through the rest of the way 3-1. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Time now to check in on the weather conditions in Korea and around the world. Okay, and that's all for now. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back at noon Korea time, but in the meantime, you can always catch up with what's been happening on our website, which can be found at arirang.co.kr/news.